Right. My understanding is you spent quite a bit of time in South Africa, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Well, it's such a complicated story. I like to just say that I'm born and raised in South Africa. I was actually born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, but moved to South Africa when I was 3. So essentially born and raised in South Africa, and then was fortunate enough to come to the States when I was 25 and married an American girl and don't plan to leave Mississippi. And I bet you a bunch of eyebrows just raised because of that fact.
Gotcha. Yeah, and just in case, I don't know if you know, my mother is actually South African. She was born in a town called Benoni. So
actually, that's the first house I lived in was Benoni. Small
was
world,
in Benoni.
my friend.
Interesting. Yeah. I think she went to the University of Witwatersrand, and
that's where I went to university. I went to the University of Witwatersrand. I got a bachelor's degree in wildlife ecology, an honors degree in wetland ecology, a master's degree in wetland ecology. And then I came to the United States actually to do a PhD in biogeochemistry.
Her uncle was a guy that was involved in conservation. I spent a lot of time in the Okavango up there, doing some of the stuff. And I know that's kind of an interesting stuff. So a little bit familiar with your part of the world. I've had the fortune to go to South Africa, a handful of times, probably 6 or 7 times. But last was around 1992. So I haven't been there in, a good 30 years. And so, well, anyway, welcome. I know you have this exciting project called Blood Origins, and you very much have kind of come. Well, I'll let you explain that, but why don't I let you do that? Why don't I let you talk? Give us your background. I know there's quite a bit, but take your time and tell us a little bit about how you came to where you are now.
Sure, and I appreciate everyone on this, and I think what's the best part about this audience is there's likely some hunters around. There's likely most of you non-hunters. And so I came from, as Shawn mentioned, a country called South Africa, and my family is almost steeped in hunting heritage, as lots of families typically are. I never got the opportunity to explore what that meant to me because I was raised in a city of 8.5 million people. And then when I came to America, I was obviously thrust into the hunting environment in the Southeast and started really essentially becoming a hunter. And I didn't really know what that meant. And I didn't know why people hunted. I didn't really know why I hunted. And so I started exploring this idea of the why. And why do people hunt? And why do people decide to harvest their own food? Why do people feel the need to go chase this animal across the world on mountainous peaks and jungles? And I started looking around to really explore the understanding of that why, and I couldn't find it. And so I built a project called Blood Origins, which is essentially a project that shows the 99% of what hunting is versus the perception of the 1% that everyone thinks hunting is. That hunting's not about killing, though that is the purpose, that is the finality of what you do, and that's how you essentially assimilate your meat and assimilate your food. But there's so much beyond it. There's so much underneath it. It's heritage and conservation and tradition and families and getting close to your creator. It's all sorts of different things. And so everyone's story is different. My story is unique to me. Shawn, yours is unique to you. Dana, yours is unique to you. But there's a common thread between all of us. And specifically this group, I'm assuming everyone is a meat eater. And so where do you get your meat? What does that look like? Do you know where your meat comes from? I know exactly where all my meat came from because I took that life. I was responsible for it. And that's something that I think a lot of hunters, we don't take for granted, though I think the perception out there of the community is that we're disrespectful. We're disrespecting life. We are ungrateful. But indeed, it's the opposite, that it's a truly emotional experience. It's truly this chasm between life and death, and we hold it in our hand when we pull the trigger or release the arrow. And that meat is, it's almost, it's paradoxical in that the meat that we harvest as hunters is likely per pound, per ounce, the most expensive meat on the planet. It's more expensive than a ribeye that you can buy in a restaurant. Yet we'll give it away for free because we know what it means to us. We know what it meant to us. We want to share it with our family. We want to share it with our friends. And so, you don't often go to the grocery store and buy 20 ribeyes and come home and call up your mates and go, hey, I got ribeyes. You want me to send you some? But when we come home from a hunt, we want to share that meat, and we want to share the adventure. We want to share the story of it. And so that's why I built Blood Origins. And it's really simply to convey the truth around hunting and what hunting and hunter dollars do for wildlife, for communities, for people, and for ourselves.
There are just a tremendous amount of misconceptions about what hunters do. There's a lot of negativity around that in all regards. But let's go back maybe historically, because there's many, pretty much all cultures have hunted without exception. With the exception of, our most modern thing, because we've domesticated animals now and we have a process where I can go to the grocery store and buy the meat. But prior to that, everyone hunted, and there were different methodologies and, obviously different climates and geographies, and animal selection are going to dictate, how you hunt, what you hunt. What are some of the sort of major differences? And because I assume you're talking to people from different parts and different ways of hunting. What kind of differences have you noted from your experience and your exploration?
I think it's almost, when you look at hunting specifically, it's almost the divide that we see in our country, in Australia, anywhere in the world. It's an urban-rural divide. And so, especially if you look at Africa, let's look at Africa specifically. People there hunt to survive, plain and simple. There is no other way. You are either going to go out and hunt and gather your food, or you're starving. That whole mantra here in America doesn't really hold true any longer. There's certain people that have decided that that's exactly the lifestyle that they want to do, and they hunt and gather themselves. So hunting today, and I think that's where the challenge is. The challenge in the rhetoric that is changing around hunting is that in the past, as you mentioned, traditional civilizations, our ancestors, we're not too far removed from our ancestors having to hunt and gather to survive. But today, we don't need to. And so the rhetoric that typically comes back to us is, well, you don't need to go hunt because you can just go down to the grocery store and you can get your meat from the grocery store. And so again, that's a choice, right? That's a choice of where you want to get your meat from. And so as hunters, the survival aspect of hunting is, in a first world scenario, likely not there any longer. Very much still there in the third world. And I think you'd be surprised where you find hunting in the tallest peaks of Nepal, in the rural, the most rural, poorest communities of Pakistan. You're going to find people that hunt and gather, and that are tied in with that tradition.
Yeah, and the point you make about the fact that there's people that have hunted to survive, and now I can go to the store and buy meat, and now there's even a belief that we don't even need meat. We can just kind of synthesize and put enough chemicals and supplements in there that we don't need to do that. But I mean, the reality is today, with 300 million people in the United States and 7 billion people on the planet, if we all decided to hunt, that wouldn't work. I mean, I just look at in the U.S., I think there's about 15 million hunters, registered hunters. Right. I mean, that number may be slightly off, but maybe 30 million deer. I don't know how many elk and, other, you would know better than I. But I mean, if all, say 150 million American men decided to hunt, and I'm not trying to be sexist, and maybe many of the women, if we had 200 million hunters in the United States, we would quickly run out. I mean, there wouldn't be enough deer licenses. You couldn't do that. So, I mean, it's not that everybody can hunt. And you make the point that for most of us that have never hunted, and I did some when I was younger, but I mean, quite honestly, I mean, right now, I mean, it's not a very cheap process to do it right. I mean, you have to have the equipment, you have to learn how to do it. It's just a skill. It takes time to acquire. So to go on your first hunt is cost prohibitive for many people. And if you're a bad hunter, you may be doing more harm than good. If you're out there shooting and, maiming animals and, let's talk about that. So who should hunt, who shouldn't hunt? Because there's people out there, they'll say, well, I'll just hunt. And I'm just saying, if they decide that they're no longer allow you to purchase meat or it's going to be too expensive, I'll just go out there and hunt. I don't know if people realize that it is very much a skill. It is often multi-generational. People are taught from a childhood. And, if you go to the indigenous tribes, they start learning those skills as toddlers. I mean, basically,
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on, just how does it, like, let's say somebody wants to hunt. I mean, how would you recommend they go about it?
Yeah, so a lot of things to unpack there. So I'll start with, how does somebody want to start hunting if they really, truly want to hunt? And not everyone needs to become a hunter. Not everyone wants to become a hunter. So let's clear that up right away. There are phenomenal resources out there from all the different species organizations, Quality Deer Management Association, your National Deer Alliance, Ducks Unlimited. There are apps now like Go Wild app. There is Powder Hook. All of these apps and all these organizations want to connect you with that individual because they understand that the barrier of entry is really, really high. Like you mentioned, you've got a ton of equipment that you need. You have to have the experience, and then you have to have the wherewithal to just go do it, right? Which is also typically a barrier of entry because you're like, wow, I'm about to go into the wilderness. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so these apps, as well as these organizations, have the ability to connect you with someone that want to mentor you, that want to take you out. If you're interested in going, I can guarantee if you reach out to us, we can put you in touch with someone that will take you. We even want to do a project where we have set aside funds for people who say, I've never hunted, I want to try and hunt, and I don't know where to start. And we want to take that on and say, okay, we will take you. And so that we can get that narrative of why you actually decided to take that step from going from a non-hunter to a hunter. So there's lots of resources out there for someone who is interested, truly interested. And even the gear, you can go to Walmart and pick up some camo. And at the end of the day, you actually don't even need camo. The best camouflage out there is just being still. So in terms of the number of hunters, right? So you're right. If everyone in America hunted, we would have a problem. We would not have the resources, the wildlife resources that we have. Currently, the hunting population in America is declining. In 2012, there was about 11% of the population that were hunters. Today, we stand at less than 5% of the population. And why that is a very, very important statistic is this, that there are federal regulations on excise tax on hunting equipment and hunting apparel, as well as all the license fees, that pretty much 70% to 80% of those funds go back into the state wildlife agency coffers that actually funds all of the restoration, conservation, and wildlife management that's happening on a state-by-state basis. And so without hunters and without the percentage of hunters, that wildlife resource that we value so much is not going to be around very much longer. And so that's the problem we're in. We're in the sort of downward spiraling problem issue that we're losing hunters and the revenues that come from hunting in terms of being pushed back into conservation restoration on the landscape. I'll give you a classic example. It just happened maybe 2 months ago in the state of Colorado. I don't know if anyone here is from the state of Colorado, but they've got some phenomenal state parks that are used by stand-up paddleboarders and hikers, mountain bikers, all of that. The state of Colorado's Wildlife Commission has mandated that those users, those non-consumptive users, will need to now buy a hunting and fishing license to use those public grounds, just like a hunter would, just like a fisherman would. And actually, there was a little bit of pushback to say, no, those are our lands, and that's true. Those public lands are our lands. As Americans, those are our lands. But someone has to take care of them. Someone has to cough up the money to be able to fund that resource. Right now, It's through acts like Pittman Robertson and Dingle Johnson that hunters and anglers are pushing money back into the landscape. So there is a fine balance to your question. There's a fine balance to how many hunters we have, to the wildlife resources that we can maintain. But there's always going to be room for new hunters, because the reason we're declining is the baby boomers are now the 50, 60, and 70-year-olds that are now climbing out of hunting are not getting recruited back in. So anyone who wants to become a hunter, please reach out to us. We'll be happy to help.
Let's talk about why it's important from a conservation standpoint, because a lot of people, they don't understand. Like in Texas, for instance, they've got this problem with wild feral pigs, boar or hog or whatever. I mean, and then there's other populations that are overrun. I know in Hawaii, certain islands are overrun with axis deer, and these animals are very destructive to the environment. And when they reach a critical mass, they end up with a sick population. So let's talk about what are the benefits of hunting other than procuring meat for yourself to eat, which is, obviously the primary goal, but there is a conservation role and there is a population health goal with this. So let's talk a little bit about why hunting is important.
Well, I think you've got to, in today's day and age, hunting is a tool for management. That is why it is in place. And it's to manage wildlife populations. When you think about how do you manage wildlife, any piece of wildlife, a squirrel, hogs, deer, predators, how do you manage them? You either move them or you hunt them. Now, somebody would argue the third, which is let Mother Nature take her course. That could work. But you've got to remember that every ecosystem in the United States, as well as across the world, has been influenced by human hands. There is no ecosystem that hasn't had some influence by human hands. And so we as humans, we as stewards of the land need to be able to manage. And hunting is a tool for management. Is it the only tool? No. Is the tool of hunting applicable to every single piece of property? No. But in some places, in most cases, it works. So the feral hog population. So unfortunately, feral hogs are here to stay. They're never going to get them eradicated. They're a nuisance species that if you do not do some sort of population control over, feral hogs can have up to 8 litters a year and can go from 2 individuals to 2,000 individuals in no time. And so you can think about the massive amount of ag damage that a feral hog population can do. They'll just take out a farm overnight. They'll wipe it out. They'll start rooting up swamps and different habitats and just really being destructive in terms of the ecosystem that they work in. And every ecosystem really has a biomass limit. You can't have, 1,000 pigs and 1,000 deer. If you want 1,000 deer, you need 0 pigs. So they really start pushing out and start competing on the resources that everything else is living on. Same thing happening in Hawaii with the axis deer. So you need to hunt. Essentially, the hunting tool from a management perspective allows you to remove the population and use it. That's what hunting is. You use that resource. The other element that is not hunting per se, but culling. Culling is a management tool. You use it to reduce a population. In most instances, culling, they don't use the resource. It's just taken out, essentially. So management is key. From a hunting perspective, management of a population has to happen. Otherwise, they start interacting with humans, they start interacting with other animals. All sorts of things go haywire.
Yeah, I mean, we see some of the culling, like I know Australia has a problem with kangaroo and rabbits, and I know they end up culling a lot of those animals, and they don't, for whatever reason, they end up just, not being eaten. And we had this issue, I'm sure you're aware, the Native American population used to thrive on the bison. And in the late 1800s, the bison were hunted nearly to extinction, and it wasn't really for their meat, it was for trophy parts. I mean, I can't remember what they were using, but they were looking some of the hides and some of the, maybe horn and stuff like that. But they were killed for reasons other than their meat. And we see these giant, vast photos of mountains of buffalo skeleton, bison skeleton. And so many people would argue that was probably an inappropriate use of that resource, and
Absolutely.
was maybe a net negative to the environment. Do you see that still being an issue? I mean, some people, like particularly trophy hunting, I know people in Africa, and being from Africa, I know there's people that really get upset when they see someone's taking down a giraffe or an elephant or some of these endangered species. But even in that situation, there is reasons why that's done and where it isn't a negative. And I mean, there has to be distinction. So maybe you can talk a little bit about why maybe in some cases culling elephants makes sense versus, when it's a problem, because I think most people would say that there's some people that inappropriately hunt, but most don't. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, you pack a lot into your questions every single time, so I have to unpack it all. So I'll tackle the last part first. Hunting is not standing on a pedestal. Hunters do not stand on a pedestal. Some of them do, but there are bad apples in our ranks, just like any other lifestyle or hobby. And so there are people that just don't do the right things. And that to us is abhorrent, and we don't like it. And so one of the things of Blood Origins is being able to point the finger there and say, that's not something we like. Go back to the first thing, so the bison. And so this is going to tail into the whole trophy hunting elephant situation. So the reason why bison were pretty much wiped out, and it was hunting at that stage, but it wasn't hunting as it is today. It was true market hunting. There was a market, a demand for it in the urban environments, which was the pelts. The pelts is what they were after, and the tongue. The tongue was a delicate cuisine. And that's all they did. They went out and they massacred and slaughtered herds down to almost nothing and make them essentially endangered at that point. Well, you've got to remember that all that market hunting for bison, for pronghorn, for elk, passenger pigeon, all of that was done in the absence of regulations. It was essentially free for all. Go and take because the resources is limitless. Well, we know that's not true. And so since the 1930s, us as hunters have recognized that, hey, we've got problems. We have got populations that are decimated, and we want to bring them back. Pronghorns, turkey, white-tailed deer, elk, all of those animals were close to extinction in the turn of the 19th century or 20th century. Today, they are at their all-time high populations. Why? It's because hunters decided to get behind them. Hunters decided to form organizations to protect them. They put in all these different mechanisms to fund them. The Dingell-Johnson Act, as I said, Dingell-Johnson's fishery, Pittman-Robertson Act for wildlife, and their federal excise tax that they put on themselves. They levied an 11% excise tax on themselves to be able to fund these restoration efforts of all these animals. And so now with legal regulations, we can't decimate populations anymore. And hunters do not want to decimate populations. Why would we want to do that? And I think that's where the whole trophy hunting aspect comes in. People are like, oh, you're just going to, and Africa is used tremendously as the trophy hunting sort of emphasis, is that you're just going there and you're wiping out and you're slaughtering animal populations. No, that's not what hunters do. That's what poachers do. Poachers are illegal individuals that they wipe out indiscriminately. A hunter will go to Africa and he is going for a trophy. And let me be clear here. That individual, I cannot change the purpose or the reason why that person goes to hunt. They want to go claim the biggest, oldest, mature male of the population. Okay. But let's talk about the consequence of that hunt. Let's talk about what happens beyond that hunt. The money that is spent on that hunt pays for jobs, pays for schooling, pays for medical, pays for anti-poaching, such that that animal now proliferates. Its population increases. So the idea of somebody going to trophy hunt, that's just their purpose. That's their reason for going. I'm not validating it. I'm not saying it's a good reason, because lots of people do things for different reasons. That's just what they do. I'm not going to change someone's reason. But what I can do is, through our project, I can show you the consequence of that person going to hunt. So if somebody went to hunt an elephant, let me be clear, I do not want to hunt an elephant. I'm a hunter. I do not want to go hunt an elephant. But when you go hunt an elephant, that elephant is a very, very expensive animal to hunt. You're talking $50,000, $80,000. None of us here would probably spend that amount of money ever on a single item. But think about the money that goes back into the community where that elephant came out of. Number two, that elephant is probably in a human-wildlife conflict situation, i.e. it's probably killed some people. It's probably taken out annual food supplies of local villages. And when you think about somebody living with that, and I know it's very difficult to put yourselves in that situation, but you probably want the same thing, is you want that elephant gone. And so the situation's either they're going to take care of the situation themselves and zero money comes back into the community, or they're going to get a hunter to come in and bring value to that animal and bring jobs and economics and all the things that come with it, as well as, which is very clear for this podcast, as well as the meat. And there's a movement right now to look at elephants really as a meat source. You can imagine the amount of meat that comes off of an elephant. And I think it's difficult for people to put their minds around it because elephants are charismatic megafauna. Everyone loves an elephant, but the amount of meat that comes off of an elephant is unbelievable. And the amount of people that that one elephant will serve and feed are hundreds. And so I'll finish with this. In Botswana, so the latest controversy is around Botswana opening up their elephant hunting again. Botswana's elephant population sits at 130,000 elephants, not endangered. There is a lot of elephants in Botswana, and they're wreaking a lot of havoc, and a lot of change in the habitat is occurring because of their population levels. The quota for elephant hunting in Botswana was 250 animals. I'll let you do the math quickly. 0.2%. So hunters are not affecting elephant populations, but rather what they're doing is they're using it as a resource that can drive economics, that can drive a protein source into this community that desperately needs it. So I get it. I get the whole trophy hunting thing is a product of ourselves, unfortunately. The hunting community has been a huge fan of sitting there with a big trophy shot and them smiling. And what does that show? That shows that somebody who doesn't understand what's happening in that picture, it shows this guy or this girl is smiling because they loved killing that animal. Unfortunately, that's not true. That kill, as I said, is probably anticlimactic, but they're smiling because of the effort that it took to get there. You know, that individual that hunted that animal might have tried it for 3 years. They've been at it for 40 days. They've been sleeping in the cold, sleeping on the rocks, hiking 10 miles a day, and they finally get the animal. I'd be smiling too because of the endeavor, the adventure, the thing that just really drove them. It wasn't the death, it wasn't the kill, but when you see that picture, I totally get it. So that's why, you know, opportunities like this to talk to you and talk to all these people that are listening to me, and thankfully nobody's thrown an egg at the video camera yet, is perfect. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the amount of meat, I mean, it is very clear. I mean, at least in my view, from what I've studied, and I've talked to many anthropologists in this, I mean, mega herbivores like elephants, like mastodons, like mammoths were just this was the food of choice for our ancestors because of that very reason. They are a very high resource animal when it comes to feeding humans for relatively not as much effort. You know, I mean, you know, you think about how much to get the same amount of calories, how many deer would you have to kill? How many fish would you have to catch? How many birds would you have to catch? And as you know, I mean, elephants don't typically run away from humans. I've had the fortune to go be in the Serengeti, and particularly when they're in mass and they see you, they just turn around and look at you and like, what are you going to do, little man? You know, I mean, because they're so much bigger, they don't have any natural predators as adults. And so early man figured out pretty quickly that, hey, these big guys have a lot of food and we can find them and track them with relative ease. And back, 100,000, 200,000 years, they were plentiful. They were Botswana on steroids. I mean, they were everywhere. At least that's what the anthropologic evidence recognized. So we, as humans, ate those quite a bit, and they had a lot of resource. They had a lot of calories. They tend to be, the bigger the animal, the more fat on them. And now, as you know, the leaner animals that we have to hunt now they're tougher because we just need that energy supply, and we go after the brain and the bone marrow and the fat around the organs, and we try to select the biggest animal we can find. And, so that's been an adaptation, and some of the skills, bow and arrow technology going back maybe 60,000 years, which came with the extinction of many of these megafaunal animals. Let's delve into this blood origin stuff. Tell me specifically what exactly is blood origins, and let's talk about some of the stuff you've learned by doing this project.
So Blood Origins is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that really is just about conveying the truth around hunting. So what we've done is we've just started off by just telling people stories. And it's to that whole idea of the trophy shot. You really don't know that individual. You don't get to understand that individual. You don't get to understand why they do what they do. And so we just decided to tell that side of the coin. No one tells that side of the coin. Nobody tells the sort of field to table type movement. And so and there's all sorts of elements that are tied into it. So we just decided to tell people stories. And then we decided to start showcasing and proving all the things that I've just discussed with you over the last, 40 minutes or so, in that it's so easy to talk about, but if you've got people on the ground showing the elephant damage, I'll tell you, hot off the press this morning, I just received videos out of Zambia. There's a man-eating lion in Zambia right now. And he's killed two males, and he put a female in hospital. But nobody understands that and how hunting is brought into that element to help. And so all we really want to do is just take a truthful look at what hunting does for wildlife, for people, for diets, you name it. And so that's what we've chosen to do. And we do it in a very different visual medium. We film very personally, we film very emotionally, we film very up close, uncomfortable, in that you just feel drawn to that individual. You want to learn more about them. And what's happening is that people, and really the project, and very importantly, the project's not built for hunters. The project is built to communicate to the non-hunting majority that have a perception maybe in favor of hunting, maybe not in so much favor of hunting. So that's who we want to communicate to. And I bet you a bunch of your audiences are in that majority group of non-hunters. And we recognize that hunting being 5% of the population, and then we have anti-hunters that are about 5% of the population, the majority is the non-hunting majority sitting in the middle. And we need to do a good job of communicating to them and changing the perception around who they think hunters are and what hunting is. So that's what we do. That's pretty much it. And we fund conservation projects around the world, essentially.
What would you say are some of the top misconceptions around hunting, and what is from your perspective, how do you unravel that? You probably hear opposition to hunting for various different reasons. What are the top maybe three things that people think, and what's maybe there's some different perspective on that?
Man, that's a really good question. And so many things jump to the forefront of my brain that we tackle on really a daily basis. I think the number one is that we're just a bunch of killers, that we just wholesale, just slaughter everything that's out there. And I have typically two responses to that. Number one, if that was true, why would we spend thousands and thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to do that? Whereas we can just go down to the local abattoir or slaughterhouse and volunteer our services. Get all the killing we need right then and there. So that's not who we are. And so it's a matter of convincing and showing people, hey, look, I saw 55 deer tonight. I didn't take any of them. I decided not to harvest. I don't need the meat. I just wanted to go experience it. That's the number one perception I think that we're facing. Number two, we get a lot of people that when we start tying hunting and conservation together, and when I say conservation, I don't mean preservation. I mean the sustaining of a resource that will be there for my kids, your kids, our grandkids one day. I think a lot of people don't understand that connection of the hunter dollars, the funds, where the funds go, the consequences of these actions. I would say that's the number two perception. And we get a lot of non-hunters that say, wow, I didn't know. I never realized it. We just dropped a film yesterday, or maybe 2 days ago, about New Zealand tar. So the tar right now are in a precarious situation. The Department of Conservation in New Zealand want to eradicate the tar because they have a very green agenda for the national parks, wherein the hunters want tar around. And so there's a balancing act of management there. Well, we decided to fly 4 non-hunters into the backcountry and show them tar. We took them on a hunt, essentially, without a rifle. And their perceptions of what that animal was, where it lived, and what we do completely changed. So it's those two elements, really, and I'll stick to those two. There's many, many more, but that hunters are all just killers. And what does hunting actually do for wildlife and people and conservation? Those are the two biggest perceptions. I think I saw a question about tar. Yeah, so tar is an animal that lives in New Zealand. It's actually native to the Nepalese Himalayas, essentially. And in the Himalayas, it's near threatened from an IUCN perspective. And so New Zealand never had any mammals, period, in its history. And so all the mammals have been introduced into New Zealand, and a lot of them were gifted. So tar were actually gifted by, I can't remember the guy's name out of England. Teddy Roosevelt gifted 6 elk to New Zealand back in 1904. And so there's a strong elk herd in New Zealand. And so tar live in these alpine areas in the snow, in the craggy mountains, and they feed on tussocks. And they're just a beautiful animal. If you Google tar, you'll see they call them the lion of the mountain because they're the only other animal except from a lion that has a mane. The big bulls have manes. Just an exceptional animal. And unfortunately, the Department of Conservation right now are enacting eradication, culling programs to reduce densities to 0. And unfortunately, they're leaving the animals to rot on the side of the mountain, unlike a hunter who would take it off the mountain and utilize that resource.
Yeah, I'll look, and this is when you talk about conservation and the animals and population health. I mean, I read a study. I think the University of Pennsylvania did this looking at white-tailed deer, and they tagged a bunch of fawns, these small newborn animals, and they followed them for a period of time, and they found out that about 50% of those animals did not survive to 12 weeks, and it was and they were killed through predation, freezing to death, starving to death. And so I think a lot of people don't understand, particularly when those populations get out of control, those animals don't have a good quality of life. And I think hunting probably assists with that. Can you talk about how hunting actually improves maybe the quality of life for the overall population, if that's something that actually does occur?
Yeah, it's quite a simple equation. And I think this is, again, if you talked about perceptions or misperceptions, hunters want more wildlife. That doesn't really work, right? I'm rhetorically speaking to myself because we kill wildlife, but we want more wildlife. And that's true. That's absolutely true. And so what do we do to enhance that? Well, you look at the private lands that are in the United States, there are millions and millions and millions of acres under private land stewardship. And people are pouring money, especially in the white-tailed deer industry. People pour money into their habitats and into their land to improve the land, to make more food, to make better bedding, to enhance the overall environment so that you grow better deer and more deer. But as hunters, we understand that there's a certain carrying capacity that is always reached. And once it's reaching that carrying capacity, you can have more deer, but they're going to be skinnier, they're going to be more unhealthy. And especially in the white-tailed deer world, we have this disease, unfortunately, right now called CWD, which is a brain encephalopathy. And it's tied to mad cow disease, unfortunately. We don't know the outcome right now, but it's a huge issue in the white-tailed deer world that is going to be pervasive for the next 5 to 10 years. But that's tied to population densities and health. So I think that, again, misperceptions. Hunters are probably the best stewards of the land because they know the outcome. The outcome is better deer. They want better deer, better experiences, seeing more deer, having more interactions with the deer, being a participant in the natural environment, not just an observer of the natural environment. So that whole stewardship, balance, health component is just integral to the stewardship component of what we do as hunters.
How does, when we look at other predators, and I think humans are natural predators, so I don't want to say that we're not, but I mean, we have wolves and mountain lions, and in Africa, obviously, you have the big cats, and and a lot of birds. Many birds are birds of prey that are pretty effective hunters. How do hunters interact with the other predators, and is there are we causing pressure on those predators? Is it helping them? Is it harming them? What's the interaction between you and a mountain lion or something like that?
Oh, man, you're really hitting the emotive topics today, hey? Bringing up elephants and predators and lions and whatnot. You couldn't have put more of an emotive topic in front of me because that's the thing. You nailed it on the head. Yeah, we may not be predators, but we are. We are the top of the food chain. And when it comes to other predators, I think primordially, like inside of us, there's a connection between us and predators. You just recognize it for what it is. But I will step back from that because that's very difficult to tease apart. I'll go back to the whole management thing, that we as humans have had our hands and touched ecosystems pretty much everywhere on this planet. And as such, a predator, just like a deer, a fox, just like a deer, a wolf, just like an elk, a mountain lion, just like a desert bighorn sheep, needs to be managed. And those predators are, they're things that we're very recognizable, like our dogs. And so when it comes to managing or hunting deer, people don't seem to have a problem. But when it comes to hunting, managing predators, people tend to have lots of problems. But it's the same situation. It's the same paradigm. It's the same, break it down to the same basic tenet of ecological management. It's the same thing. You can't let something get out of whack. If a population gets out of whack, there's going to be consequences. And as the wildlife agencies of the states, and this is a very important point, a very important take-home point, is that all of this wildlife, including predators, is very carefully managed by the best science that the money can buy. Obviously state agencies are strapped for cash, but they want to do more monitoring. They want to do more science. And so predators, the hunting of mountain lions, the taking of mountain lions, the number of quota per unit is very carefully determined. And that's what it is. If 4 lions get taken out, 4 lions get taken out. And they are based on surveys, population surveys, scat surveys, camera traps that have essentially, bait stations where they put roadkill and whatnot to determine population sizes. So it's all very, very carefully managed. Unfortunately, it's just the fact that it's a mountain lion or it's a bear that just stirs up the emotive side of who we are as humans. And coming back to my first point, I don't know if that emotive side is stirred up because of Disney or of the fact that we inherently are predators ourselves. So I'll let you decide.
Yeah, I mean, I have no qualms about us being predators. I think, we're the most successful predators on the planet. I mean, you think about what we are capable of, able to hunt. And I mean, we're the only species that's eaten whale and has eaten lion and has eaten monkey and has eaten, dolphin. And I mean, there's not an animal that I think humans have not been able to eat. And there's no other predator that can say that. I mean, lions are incredibly impressive animals, but they don't eat whales. I mean, they just don't, they just don't have and it's obviously our brain that has allowed us to figure all these things out. And so I think our brain is obviously our biggest weapon for sure. I mean, we're not particularly fast or strong, or we don't have the pointy teeth or the sharp claws. As some people say, the only reason we should eat meat is if you eat it raw and you have pointy teeth, which I think is a ridiculous argument. I mean, it's, like I said, we've had access to fruits and vegetables and grains now for agricultural stuff for tens of thousands of years, and yet we still choose to kill animals. And obviously, I don't think any hunter sort of takes that lightly. And I think I think more than other people understand that what's involved and what goes into that. And I know a lot of people that do hunt, they appreciate it more because they know how much work goes into it, which is I think more difficult than most people understand. What do you find that there's any current hunting practices that you disagree with? I know some people were pointing out, hey, maybe fox hunting is not good. Maybe if we don't eat them, maybe if we just eat them and don't, like with the buffalo. I mean, if we're only eating the tongues and throwing away most of the meat, is that not a good practice in your view?
Geez, you hit me with the hardest question last. So there are obviously practices of hunting that I will not partake in. And that's purely from an ethics perspective. There is a lot of put and take type hunting that I'm just not a fan of, because I like adventure. I like to push myself. I like to find myself. I like to experience the landscape just as much as hunting that animal. That's just what I like. And so typically when somebody asks me that question, what I break it down to is the hunting practice legal? Yes or no? If the hunting practice is legal based on that government's set of regulations, then I'm good with it. However, then you step into the whole ethics scenario, and we have 41 participants on this call. There are 41 different sets of ethics on this call. Everyone is shaped by their past. Everyone is shaped by what they believe in. Everyone is shaped by, they may agree with deer hunting, but they do not agree with predator hunting. Okay, those are your sets of ethics, and that's okay. I'm completely okay with that. Some people would say, I get a lot of people that say, I'm a hunter, but there's no way that I condone elephant hunting. It blows my mind, but I can see that. That's an ethics issue. It's not a legality issue. So legality comes black and white. Ethic is gray. And ethics are subjective. And they are tied with emotion. And they're tied with this idea of fair chase. And fair chase is different for different people. Some people may think that you have to go back to our traditional roots with a bow and arrow, a stick string, even a traditional bow, and that is the only way that you should hunt. I'll say the biggest argument we get, the biggest divisive comments we get from anti-hunters are, you need to level the playing field such that no weapons are allowed. Well, there's several ways to answer that. One, I'm sure all of our ancestors used weapons. Number two, why would we go primitive and maim the animal or injure the animal or cause it more suffering and pain than it necessarily needs to have, when we could ethically dispatch that animal very quickly with the modern technology we have? Number three, it comes down to, you just want to make sure that you're practicing what you feel is right in terms of what hunting means to you. And that's where the ethics comes down, what it boils down to. Shawn, yours may be different than mine. I'm not going to call you out on it, because to you, that's how you hunt. And this is how I hunt. And, it's just a tough question to answer, and I hope I answered it to the best of my ability.
No, I think that's fair. One thing, and I listened to one of your podcasts or one of your episodes. I can't remember which one it was, but you mentioned it like in South Africa now, and I would, in contrast to the U.S., in many countries, I think in Europe and many other places, hunting is very, very difficult from a legal, a permitting standard. Are you seeing discrepancy in the world? Are there countries that have now completely outlawed it? And do you feel that is something that may go that way for many places?
Yeah, sure. Hunting's being cut everywhere. You're seeing trapping being removed on the state perspective. You're seeing certain styles of hunting being removed on a state's perspective. You're seeing certain countries ban hunting completely. You're seeing countries adopt new hunting regulations that are increasing the availability of weapons that they can use. For instance, Denmark just passed a national law that they can now bow hunt. There's some sort of, again, emotive component tied to bow hunting that says in your brain that bow hunting must be less lethal than a gun. Well, the science doesn't show that, but obviously politicians have got this idea that it is. And so bow hunting typically gets knocked off the platform first and foremost. The other part of the regulations that unfortunately is happening across the world is tied back to the question around trophy hunting. And so this idea, and it ties back to essentially a very old school way of thinking called colonialism, in that, and it just happened in California, and it's happening in the UK, in which California just tried to move a bill called SB 1175 through the ranks. And they actually snuck it under the veil of a COVID wet market piece of legislation. And what that bill actually was going to do was going to reduce, it was actually banning the trophy hunting of certain animals across the world, in Africa, by not allowing them to come into the state of California. And so what those politicians decided was, well, we're going to tell the people of Africa how to manage their resources for them by enacting this piece of legislation in California, essentially eco-colonialism. And that's what is happening in the UK as well, is that they're just promulgating regulations that is forcing hunting changes somewhere else. So you're seeing changes across the board. I think as society migrates to more of an urban type environment, two things happen. One, the idea and the connection to nature, the connection to the living world is broken. And when that connection is broken, this idea of understanding what hunting is and the lifestyle of hunting is also going to be broken. So that's on the bad side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, and I think you guys are experiencing this a lot, is this locavore movement is now coming to fruition, understanding where our food comes from and being able to know that it came from a certain radius around us, that we know where it got harvested, we know who slaughtered it, we know there's an intimate connection, there's an intimate relationship with that food. That's helping hunting, because people want to hunt for themselves now. They want to have that connection with their food. They want to know where that food came from and be able to tell that story of that piece of meat or that food item to their friends and family when they share that meal with them.
Yeah, that's definitely the case in this community. You know, like I said, we're all people that appreciate meat and where it comes from, and many of the folks, they rely on wild game. I think it's still difficult for most people to be completely independent from domestic, meat production. Quite honestly, I think a lot of people, I guess if you draw an elk and you get an elk, you've got pretty good food. I mean, a deer might last you maybe 2 months, something like that, depending on the size of the deer. You're not gonna feed yourself for a year, and depending how many deer tags you get, so and how successful you are. So I mean, it's still not, I would say, and there's people. I mean, obviously, there's people that rely on it and they do subsist on that. And I'll use the word subsist because sometimes they're just kind of barely making it. But Do you find that you think if they start to say, I'm going to make hunting illegal in certain countries and parts of the world, people will still do it regardless? And then who would be out there enforcing these hunting deals where these people decide, hey, I'm going to feed myself regardless, or there's, I think, again, third world countries where obviously regulations are probably non-existent or minimally enforced. How do you sort of prevent people from hunting? This is a instinctual thing, I think. Do we have game wardens out there running around tracking people down? Is that doable? Is there enough surveillance and enough manpower to ban hunting, do you think?
Yeah, so I will couch that in two different examples. The first example would be here in the US. If in the US we decided as a country to ban hunting, then what would happen is that more money would be pumped into law enforcement, and there would be law enforcement agencies stopping people hunting. The illegal capture, harvesting of animals would be cracked down significantly. And so I think that could happen in a first world country. Absolutely. You just ramp up the law enforcement requirements around it. In a third world country, like Mozambique, say, or Zambia, or Pakistan, or Tajikistan, what's going to happen is that these guys that are relying on hunters coming in to give them a food source, as well as all the other things I just described, that's going to be gone. So what just happened there? The value of that animal was taken from something that gave them jobs and $50,000 of income to the community on an annual basis, to medical, to schooling, to the meat, just got reduced to the meat. And so that's what they're going to do. They're just going to go back to their old ways, and they're going to poach because they are hungry and they need to feed their families. And as such, they're going to be indiscriminate in terms of their harvesting. And they're just going to take. And we're going to be back in the situation that we were in Pakistan, in Zambia, in Mozambique. Pakistan, for instance, the markhor, M-A-R-K-H-O-R. The markhor was almost gone 25 years ago. There was less than 30, I think, or less than 300 individuals in Pakistan. Today, there's more than 3,000, because now the villagers don't see it as a meat. They see it as meat plus $250,000. That's what it costs to hunt a markhor, $250,000. And people will pay it. That's why there's 3,000 animals on the planet now. Not 30, not 300, 3,000. That's the difference. That's what happens between a first world and a third world country. I don't think hunting will ever disappear in my lifespan in America. However, it's going to be gone for my kids and my grandkids one day, which is why I fight now for them. In a third world country, one set of regulations out of the UK or the US will take out hunting. And what these regulations are doing, they think, is we're protecting the animal, we're protecting the wildlife. No, you've just signed the death warrant of that species. It will be gone. And I hate to be so blunt about it, but that is how it's going to roll. That is how it's going to work. I've seen it. We've got example after example after example. Unfortunately, nobody's listening. But through this project, hopefully, we're just pushing a new narrative. And opportunities like this, Shawn, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. That's what we can do.
Yeah, and like I said, I certainly empathize with what you're doing, and I think I can speak hopefully for much of the community that we most of us would agree with what you're trying to do and what you're doing. So, can you let us know how to, one, support what you're doing, and number two, how to find the Blood Origins information or any other information, or follow you on social media, any of those types of things that are going to help get the message out there?
Yeah, so I saw Kelsey just put in our website on the chat. So website bloodorigins.com. anything Blood Origins, you can find us. Blood Origins on Twitter, Blood Origins on Instagram, Blood Origins on Facebook, Blood Origins on YouTube. I will warn you, you go into YouTube, you're going to go down a little deep, dark vortex because our content is short, it's powerful. You're going to watch one, then you're going to watch the next, you're going to watch the next, you're going to watch the next. So I just, you know, we're a nonprofit. Obviously, anything we can do to help you. I think I saw earlier someone saying, how can we help non-hunters that are interested in getting into hunting? Reach out to us. You can DM us through Instagram, DM us through Facebook, send us an email through the website. We will connect you. And luckily, we have a lot of resources. We know a lot of people, and we want to help. And we want to showcase that story, specifically why someone decided to go from being a non-hunter to a hunter. And this community that you've created, that's simple. People want to know where their meat comes from. And they want to know, they want to have the relationship with that animal to know that it's the healthiest piece of protein that they can put into their body. There is no healthier piece of protein, you may argue with me, but that is humanely harvested, lives a rich life, is as organic as you possibly can get, than taking something out of the wild and using it for yourself.
No, I don't disagree with you. I think there's a lot of truth to that, and you know, hopefully, like I said, hopefully you'll make some good progress, and this will hopefully get you some more exposure because I think it's well deserved. Robbie, thank you so much for coming on. I think everyone has enjoyed this, and I think hopefully people, as they download it and as this becomes a podcast, we'll get it out there. And anything we can do for you, let us know. And like I said, we certainly appreciate having you step into our community and teaching us something.
Thank you for the open-mindedness. Really do appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm very open-minded when it comes to stuff because I'm, you know, I got a very non-traditional view on nutrition. You know, I think it's pretty traditional if you go back far enough, but, you know, to say meat is healthy is almost considered, you know, kind of heresy, which I think is bizarre, but that's the way the world is turning. So anyway, good to have people like you. Thanks a bunch, Robbie. Thanks everybody for being there. I'll be back tomorrow from my little place in Florida, which is I'm having a lot of fun. So you guys take care. All right. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, everyone.